All right. A couple last folks wandering in. But thanks for coming, everyone. Hi, my name is Alex Hoppelman. I'm an engineer on the Facebook Games team, kind of based out of Seattle. Before I get started, I want to say it's actually especially exciting for me to be able to talk here. I've been a Unity user for a bunch of years, way back to the Unity 4 days. And so kind of being able to actually give a presentation at this event in particular is special for me. So thank you all for attending, and excited to be giving this talk. We've got a couple topics to go over today. Want to kind of touch on some of the stuff that's coming up here. Last year at Unite in LA, so I think that was about exactly 11 months ago, we made the big announcement of our partnership with Unity and unveiled the Unity built-in support for Facebook Game Room, where you could, for any Unity game, you could just publish straight to Facebook. And so I'm going to start off talking about kind of like what's happened over the last 11 months with that, the progress we've made, and some of what's going on with that. Then I'm going to focus a little bit more on a technical section about what it takes to actually integrate with Game Room, what it looks like to go and publish to Facebook, how you can control the deployment of those builds. And we'll look at the code of a couple of specific APIs where you take advantage of some of the Facebook capabilities once you're on our platform. Finally, I'm going to touch a little bit on some of the future stuff we're looking at. Being Facebook, we're very interested in games community. We're doing a lot of investments across the board about building games into all sorts of the social things that happen on Facebook. Of course, games have always been social, from two kids kicking a rock around or whatever. It's always been a thing that people like to do with each other. And it's not just the games themselves, it's also the interactions around the games that are really important. And Facebook wants to be a big part about kind of really helping enable that stuff. Of course, the key thing about that is that really also then creates more engagement with the games, creates the longer lifespan of the games as people talk about them, try to get more achievements, and interact with them more. When we think about games, we think about this, discover, play, watch, share, as kind of our mantra for what the basic set of interactions that people have with these games. Discover, obviously, there's tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands on mobile games out there, and finding the games that an individual game player will really enjoy can be really challenging nowadays. Sometimes it's only a couple of top games that bubble up to the top. We want to help solve the problems of people finding the games that their friends are playing, finding the games that are going to be uniquely interesting to them, and we want to recognize that games aren't just about a couple of genres that appeal to the super hardcore gamer types. There's all sorts of stuff, all kinds of interesting creativity coming out of the indie gaming community and things like that, and we want to help people discover that stuff. Obviously, you want to be able to play games, and we provide, for example, Game Room and Instant Games, which are places you can play games. But we're also happy to go and collaborate with people who are playing games on any of the different platforms and surfaces. Finally, watch is also a really key thing that's come up in the last few years. People spend more time watching other people play video games than they do playing themselves. For someone who's over 40, that's a little bit of an interesting phenomenon. It took me a little bit to get used to. But in fact, having had a chance to experience a bunch of the really creative video content producers, they make these things really fun. And you find out about new games that way. And so the Watch platform, especially live video, but also including video on demand, is an important part of, and we think it really goes hand in hand with play. People go back and forth between the two. And finally, of course, share is important because people like to share those experiences with their friends, with groups and communities. And one of the really fascinating things that we've discovered, I suppose it's not that surprising, but people expand their community when they're playing games. The set of people that are in their normal social network that they share cat pictures with is not the same set of people necessarily that they want to play games with. And so providing ways for people to connect in those broader gaming contexts is a really important thing to us. So these are just some of the themes that we think about when we overall approach the game space. Let's dive in and talk about a little bit what's happened in the last year. So we made these announcements last year. We've done a bunch of work to improve Game Room. A bunch of native games have come to Game Room, and we've got over 100 games now. And finally, I'm going to touch on a little bit of some of the ways that you can make money with Game Room that we know as an industry that you need to actually be able to monetize to be able to continue following your passion of creating these games. And so understanding how those mechanisms work is really important. For those who haven't seen Game Room before, I'm going to give a quick little demo. This is recorded to avoid some of the classic problems of trying to do live demos on stage. I've done too many of these to kind of not fear that. So this is our new games feed that we launched in the past year. One of the really cool things here is that you can have a feed of content about all the games that you play, all the gaming news outlets that you follow, what your friends are doing, games that you play that you might be interested in playing again. So this acts as a great surface for people to discover new content and re-engage with the existing things that they love. We, of course, have a catalog of a bunch of different games that you can play. And you can see, again, the diversity of the different types of games we have here. We obviously do have a bunch of casual stuff, but with the native games based on Unity that have come to Game Room, there's also a lot more support for all kinds of different genres that really take advantage of the PC. Native games are installed. And so here we're installing a game. Now, through the magic of video editing, I'm going to skip over a little bit of the download process so we don't have to sit here and watch 400 megabytes download. So in a second here, we're going to kind of skip to the end of magic internet download speed. But native games on Game Room download to your PC and run with the full native CPU and GPU resources there. Now, one important thing, there we go. I just skipped to the end. And now we're installing and running the game. It's pretty much what you'd expect. The game installs, and then it launches, does its splash screen, and does its stuff. While we support full CPU and GPU capabilities, like any native Unity game, it is important to remember that we have a pretty diverse audience, and not everyone has discrete GPUs. Probably half of our audience has built-in Intel GPUs, and so making sure your game scales for that big audience is probably pretty important. And then finally, this is our video tab, where you can go and see a bunch of live and recorded videos, and things are organized into a bunch of different categories. Things that are live right now tend to bubble up to the top because they're currently going on, but things are down below organized by different games, and we have the taxonomy of all the different types of content that are there. So it makes it really easy for people to discover that video content that they want and play with that. I should also note that the video content also shows up in the feed, again, associated with games that you like. So if there's some cool streamer that's live right now showing off a game that you like, that you've played before, it's likely to show up in your feed, and you can find out about it that way. So we've been hard at work improving Game Room for this past year. I got to say, a lot of these things are basics, and we know that. Since the last year, we support large downloads, arbitrary size. We have a game that launched that was over 16 gigabytes, Dragonfront, just a couple weeks ago. That can be a little bit of a wait, but it comes along with high-quality art assets that we know sometimes are necessary to have those larger amounts of content. We also support premium games and gifting, if that's the right model for your game. Full screen is kind of a pretty basic thing for games, but that's supported now, and the ability to easily toggle between our UI, where we have the Chrome around the outside, and easy access to that navigation, and the full screen thing. I showed you the live game streaming tab, and also the games feed in the demo. And we think that those are both, again, really important mechanisms for people to find out about your game. It's not enough to just go and build a game anymore and toss it out into the world. It's really important to go and create that kind of community around the game, both through pages that you create and then groups that the community creates, where people can then find out and talk about your game. Finally, a lot of the things that you find in Facebook Game Room are also coming to the web Facebook. And in fact, you can see that there's this Games tab over on the left side of Facebook now points to some of these same sort of things, and you're going to see a lot of those content that happens in the native client. Obviously not playing native games, but the other types of content will be showing up and accessible just on the web, and some of that's there today. Over the past year, we've had over 100 native titles shipping, mostly based on Unity. And the thing I want to highlight here is we have a real diverse style of titles. Unlike, one of the things that's actually special about the Facebook Game Room platform is we have a little bit broader set of demographics. Especially for native games, our demographics do still skew, for example, to male, but it's a much closer balance than you'll find in most other gaming places. So there's lots of women that play. A lot broader spectrum of ages also come to our platform. And so some of the titles that have been very successful are ones where they struggle finding an audience on some traditional gaming platforms that are really sort of geared just to the hardcore gamer, and they can actually find really big audiences on Game Room. I should say that also other types of title have done just fine too. But it's definitely a place where we're taking advantage of Facebook's technology for personalizing things to specific people to help people find the content that's going to be right for them. And we definitely are big believers in that kind of explosion of creativity that the gaming industry has seen in the last few years, and we want to help that continue to be successful. We've done some interesting research on how having this native platform to go along with our previous web-based platforms has impacted monetization for our users. People who are using the native platform have higher engagement. They spend more time playing the games. And overall, the revenue per user has been higher for people who are engaged on that native platform. And so it's definitely something where targeting it and the much richer experiences that you can provide, especially using Unity, you know how much more powerful that can be than the traditional sorts of things that people had on the web platform. And this even does very well compared to mobile for most titles because, again, you have that richer PC-based experience. I want to touch on Facebook Analytics because this is another really key thing about how to help your game grow. We're no longer living in a world where you go and build your game and then launch it out to the universe and then you're done. There are some times where that still works, but mostly people still stay engaged with their game and update their game and want to know how is their audience interacting with it. Facebook Analytics gives you a very powerful set of tools to see what people are playing your game with detailed demographic breakdown. And I'm going to show you later on how you can use app events to log all kinds of custom data about gameplay in your game and get that information on how people are interacting with your game to help make it better. We know that this is the key way to help your business and your game grow by actually really seeing what your audience is doing with it. Most big companies have their own custom analytics package, and it's possible to integrate those custom ones with the Facebook Analytics, but this kind of brings that to analytics available to anyone and also gives you the kind of unique demographic information that because we have Facebook identity, we can understand about the audience. So let's talk a little bit into the details of what's involved in bringing your game to Game Room. I'm going to assume that most of you are probably already building Unity games of some sort. So you're already building for one of the other platforms that Unity supports. As I said, Game Room does run on PC, so it's important to have good keyboard and mouse support. If you're porting a mobile title, there's a couple of little things you want to adapt there. And the other thing to remember is compared to consoles, most people are using, and it's probably about 60%, 50 to 60%, have the integrated, usually Intel, GPUs. There's a lot of people who use this on laptops. So it's not the people with the killer gaming rig. There are a bunch of those people too, but if you want to have a good reach for your game, it's really important that you take advantage of the Unity capabilities to really easily scale your graphics up and down for those different types of computers. Again, Unity has great support for that, and so that's pretty easy with this platform. The deployment part is so easy that this isn't going to take long. Literally, Facebook is just a new deployment target. And so you take your existing game, You have to put in the app secret and an upload key into the settings. And then you just go and you say package build for uploading and build. And it goes and does its thing and sends the files on up to the Facebook servers. Now, at that point, your build is not out to the public yet. It's available for your testing. And then you can go to the web portal, to the Developer Center. And in the Developer Center, you'll see a list of all the different builds that you have. So here I've just uploaded this new version 8 of Friend Smash. And I can push it to production once I've tested it. We also have a really unique capability, which is you can push it to 10% of the audience, or 25, or 50, or 100%. So this lets you try out the game for a certain percentage of the audience, this new build, before you unleash it on everyone and make sure that you didn't introduce some critical bug or something like that. Gives you a great way to kind of do a staged rollout. And we do that for pretty much all the features that we build. We kind of roll them out in stages. And so that was a really important thing for us to provide to people developing games. And so I press it, and it rolls out to production, and it switches over, and then anyone who tries to play the game in Game Room will get the update, download the update. And there is now support for differential incremental updates also, so you'll just get the parts that changed. So unless you touch all of the graphics assets, hopefully that's not a huge download. Let's get into a little bit of the extra code you can write to integrate. Now, so far we haven't written any code. All we had to do was take our existing game, and it's now on Facebook. But with a little bit of extra work, we can take advantage of the fact that Facebook has identity information and some of these other features that we're going to talk about, like app events and other things. Users on Facebook Game Room are automatically already logged in. So we already have their identity. They don't have to type in a username password again. But for your game to get access to the token so that you can do other stuff, you have to call login with read permissions, or there's another login call if you want to also be able to do write stuff. When you do this, you can set a list of permissions that you want to ask for. And this is a place where I'd actually recommend that most people try to ask for very few permissions. If you're just asking for the public profile, there will be no extra UI that gets shown to the user. They'll just be able to run the game. They'll have had that one login dialog. Whereas if you ask for a bunch of extra permissions, we do have to ask the user to grant those permissions to your game. And so for most games that don't need to actually, because there's other ways to go and access sharing and things like that without having to have direct access to the list of the user's friends and things like that. So it's really helpful to generally have it be low friction and not show any of that UI. I'm going to talk about a couple of the other APIs once we've got logged in. Before I go into the details of the other ones, I want to touch on Graph API, because it's one of these underlying things. It's a RESTful web service that we have built into Facebook. And once you have that login access token, you can use it. And it's a little bit lower level, but it gives you access, subject to permissions and privacy policy, to almost all of the base information. And many of the other APIs that we build are actually built on top of it. So given that access token, you can also directly call the Graph API. And this is just something in talking to a bunch of developers, not a lot of people realize. And it can be, and it's really not that hard to call. There's a bunch of utility routines, and I'll show you a little bit what that looks like in a couple slides. But really, you're just doing things like gets. In this case, /me means the current logged in user, and you can ask for specific fields on that. In-app purchase is, of course, a pretty important capability if you want to monetize using in-app purchase techniques. There's sort of two different models for how to do this. The top one is the easier way, and we call that Payments Lite. Basically, you configure on the developer control panel the products that you want to sell, their pricing, and the information about them and descriptions. And then all you have to do is pass in the product ID, and the dialog will pop up, let the user confirm the product. One of the things to remember is because Facebook has payment information for most users, payments are very low friction here. So it's very easy to actually go and use this to get purchases. If you need more direct control, you can use the full payments API. That thing involves you having to run a server, and it'll make call-outs to the server to get information on the individual purchases. And so you're passing in URLs, in that case, to these product definitions that you're hosting on your server, and there's an interaction there. But that gives you the full richness of the API. App events are the key to unlocking most of the power of analytics. There's a bunch of kind of default stuff you get with analytics for free, but with app events, you can post specific events in your game and then do whatever sort of analysis you want to do on that. And again, you can break that down by demographics and all the sort of other information that you want about the game. In this case, I'm using a built-in, so there's a namespace, facebook.unity.app event name, and there's a set of built-in app event names that have standard behaviors. In this case, achieved level is a great one for when the user achieves some new mark in the game, whether it's a level or whatever else. And then you can just pass in as a parameter the level that they achieved. You can add arbitrary custom parameters to any of these app events, and if you don't like our built-in app events, you can also send custom ones. And so you can use this to instrument all the behavior of your game. You don't have to pay for the servers, and all that information is just there in the analytics. Game stats, key player stats, is a new thing that we're rolling out soon that I've been working on lately, and I kind of want to share it with you guys for the first time, a little preview here. What this is about games being able to expose stats on a player from in-game so that we can show them on Facebook in groups that are associated with that game, and so people have verified information about the people they're playing with. One of the new features that I'm going to show you in a little bit that we're working on in conjunction with groups is when we looked at existing behavior in groups, one of the most common things people do in gaming groups is they're looking for a friend to play with. People want to go on an adventure, ideally with a friend. That's what they're coming to try to do. And so if I can go and I can see that this person has been banned 0.9% of the time and they've got a 53% win ratio, and those aren't things that they made up, those are stats that came from the game, I have a much more verifiable source of that information, and it makes this capability stronger. These stats are anything that you want to define that are custom to your game. Is it wins and losses? Is it number of shots fired? Is it ban ratios? Whatever you want and want to display. You can access this via the Graph API, and this is an example of calling the Graph API that I was talking about before. In this case, we're doing a post because we're modifying data to me/GameStats, so it's the current person's game stats. It's automatically associated with the application that has the token, and we're going to increment the stat name called name by some amount. So there's an atomic increment operation, and you can also set a value. So the increment's very useful because these are distributed systems. And there will be also a simplified API where you can just call set or inc directly in our namespace in the Unity SDK. So you can see how that's a little easier to use than the Graph API. But I thought it was really important to illustrate how that underlying Graph API is there. And the other thing is if you have a server side, you can call the Graph API stuff from the server also, given the user's token, and use that to have kind of a non-cheatable way to update this sort of information. So finally, I'd like to kind of finish up a little bit talking about games community. As I mentioned, we're doing a bunch of stuff with pages and groups and video streamers and all that sort of stuff, and a little bit about the future, about how we're thinking about the SDK and Unity. We've got a couple examples here of group integration of things we're looking at. So this a little bit kind of blows my mind, but as of about a month ago, Facebook did not have a category for groups for video games. That dialog on the top left there only had 14 things in it, not 15. And we kind of had one of those real dull moments where we realized that we had to add video games as a category so people could tag groups appropriately. We did a bunch of analysis, and we could tell that a bunch of the groups out there were about video games, but none of them were marked in an appropriate way. So now when you've marked a group as being about video games, you can also say what game it's about. as the administrator of the group, you can say, this is a group about this game, and this enables a bunch of those features, like the find players and the gamer stats and other things that are coming up soon, that make that group richer for people playing that game, wanting to interact with other players, for streaming content, for being able to consume content from the publisher and studio of the game. Because one of the things that a lot of people want to do in groups is they want to get all that content into their groups to share with their friends. They're really excited when the producer of the game goes live to talk about the new update. And we want to help all that information flow to the places where people are looking for that information. Finally, we have an example on the right there of a find player post, and this is a new type of post. You know, in Facebook, you can post a normal message or an image or a video or an event or all these different types of post types, and one of them is this find player post, which is just a little bit structured, so you can put some tags. I'm looking for someone who is, you know, can do top lane and likes to jungle, or, you know, whatever sort of thing is appropriate for your game, and they can put in tags, and it can be associated also with the player stats. So people can find each other and connect, and then they can chat in a chat room to interact with each other to decide if this is a fun person to go and play with. Finally, when we think about what we're going to be doing in the future, one of the things that we just love about Unity is it's available everywhere. You know, it has so many different platforms you can target, and we really want to meet gamers where they are. You know, we have a unique ability to provide a bunch of these community connections, and it doesn't really matter what gaming platform they're on. We have existing Unity SDKs for mobile, and we have the Game Room SDK for Unity. And one of our goals is right now those are a little bit distinct. They have pretty much the same APIs, but to make life easier for Unity developers as we go forward so that you can just build one application and target all the different platforms you want, including Game Room and including other stuff, and have that consistent thing. And so when we think about one of the things that I'm hoping to talk about next year, we'd really love to kind of clean up some of those different SDKs and make it a lot more consistent for you guys, because when we look at Unity and our partnership with them, their greatest strength is their broad reach. Well, one of their many great strengths is their broad reach of all these different platforms. And we know that as a game developer, you often want to target more than one of these, and we want to make that easy for you. So we talked a lot about, about a bunch of things today. We've come a long way in the last year. I talked about a bunch of the updates we did to Game Room. Hopefully showed how quick and easy it is to bring your game to Game Room. Obviously, there's a little bit of code to write to go and customize stuff, but really, at that first step, it's just a build target, and it's pretty easy to go play with that on your own. When you're ready to go and publish your game, you can contact our partner team about getting approval for your game to be listed in the catalog, but you can go ahead and start playing with stuff on your own right away. And finally, I also talked a lot about our growing investment in games. We really want to emphasize that our team that's working on games, both on the engineering side and the rest of the organization, keeps growing, and we're here to kind of go and help make you guys successful together with us. Because we really think that when we look at the community stuff that's the overall theme for what our company is focused on, gaming has always been and will continue to be a really key part of that. Finally, I just want to touch on a couple things. There's a contest that we've been running in partnership with Unity. The URL at the top right, the winner of the contest, the game that's submitted there will be picked and will be featured in the top bar for a period of time on Game Room. So the best title that comes up there, please get your submission in. I think they're due by the end of October. So you've got another almost month, but time's running out. All of our developer documentation is at fb.me/gameroom. We've got a bunch of info there. And you can also contact the partners at fb.com. And we have a booth downstairs. We'd love for you guys to stop by and talk to us. We can do demos in person of Game Room, talk about what integration looks like, and more. I don't think I have any time for questions because we're at about 30 seconds before the end, but a couple of us will be out in the hallway out there if you have any questions afterwards, and thank you very much for coming.